What's up, St. Mark's? It is Friday. Hopefully you're watching this on Friday, which means that I got the email to you and you opened the email and we're able to share in this moment on Friday and hopefully not any other day, because otherwise the intro would be weird. So what we started last week was an exploration of verbs and adjectives that apply to Christian life. I wanted to keep the topics broad so that from week to week I could kind of shape it in a particular direction. But last week, as you'll recall, if you didn't, go back and watch it on the YouTubes. It's on YouTube and on Facebook. I talked about abide and what that meant as a word that has somewhat fallen out of use, and how it applies to Christian life and Christian life now, in particular in regards to COVID-19 and all that different stuff. Today I wanted to pick a word that applies to something I'm going through personally, but also something that I think a lot of us deal with on a semi-regular basis. American culture has difficulty grieving. Grief is something that is not built into our process of grieving. I took a couple of classes on anthropology, so I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds, but American culture pulls a lot of its sort of window dressing, so to speak, from Britain, obviously. Brits notoriously cannot process emotion. Why? Well, it's mostly because their society is not set up in a way to properly allow for that outlet. Other cultures have different ways of dealing with grief. The Jewish people in particular, if you read through the entirety of the Old Testament and huge portions of the New Testament, you will see that grief and the expression of grief and the process of grief is something that is talked about a lot more. The public ripping of clothes, covering oneself in ashes and sackcloth, it sounds kind of dramatic, but really it's this public and violent expression of an inward emotion. Western, British, American culture is often uncomfortable with this sort of outward expression. We have very concentrated bits of it that we might feel okay with expressing from time to time, but outwardly it's very difficult for us as a culture to express grief. And I want to talk about it because, one, it's something that I'm going through right now. I am in the process of grief. For those of you who do not know, my grandfather passed away a few weeks ago, and my grandmother is not looking very well right now. So I'm in mid-grief process and also pre-grief process. So I picked this word from the word bank that I picked last week, and I talked about it in the last video. If you didn't watch it, go check it out. And I picked this word because it's something that I think I can talk about. And also, there is a really prominent Bible verse that I think applies directly to this, and I want to look at it real quick. It's a verse you're all familiar with. I'm not trying to break any new ground with this series. I do not have a degree in theology or biblical studies or anything of that nature, so I'm just kind of, I'm going off of the stuff that we all collectively know, and this is just a reminder for all of us. So I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and you're familiar with this. It says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance." It goes on like that for another couple of verses, and I encourage you to go and read Ecclesiastes in its entirety, preferably with a good study or companion. This book is one of the more controversial books in the Bible, I would say, just based on my very limited understanding. However, it speaks to a very human and very bedrock element of who we are, that there should be and there is a time to mourn. And I think that sometimes we as a church body don't always open up that space enough. It can be difficult with the nature of our lives and how segmented and sort of categorized everything is. We have our social group over here, and we have our spiritual group over here, and we have our family over here, and we have our extended family and our friends over there. And so the human experience becomes spread out over all these disparate groups that may not interact with each other. The church theoretically pulls all of these things together, or it's supposed to in its most ideal form. And I think that's where we sometimes fail, that the church doesn't necessarily pull all those things together. And so experiencing grief, expressing grief, it's difficult. We put ourselves together before we interact with our friends at church because we don't want to be a downer. We show up and we put a smile on our face or whatever, even if the week was hard, because this is a social group, and maybe when I'm with my close friends, then I can express grief. But the Jewish people didn't think like that. For them, the temple, community, and friendships, family, these were all one thing, or they were all at least very interconnected. And so when you put on sackcloth and ashes and you openly displayed your grief, it was a symbol to everyone that you were in mourning. And Jesus talks about how we should join with people who are mourning, that we should join with people who are celebrating, that we need to have that communal connection, that we feel or attempt to empathize with what other people are going through. So again, this is just a short little section of the Bible, short little idea. Reach out to your brothers and sisters at St. Mark's, or your brothers and sisters who maybe don't go to St. Mark's. See how they're doing. I know there's been a lot of, not just in my life, but I know a lot of people have experienced passings recently, and it can be difficult. See how people are doing. Just because they're, smiling, or just because it appears they're doing well when you see them at service or whatever, or on Facebook, give them a call. If you see people on social media who look, happy all the time or whatever, it doesn't mean they really are. People put up a facade because you don't want to bring other people down. And so we often mask how we feel. So reach out, break down those barriers, see how your friends are doing, and I'll see you next week.